This is the Northwest Arm, and if it were just a little longer, the city of Halifax, Nova Scotia, would be an island. The open Atlantic lies there, to the south. To the east, right across town, there's the harbor. Just up on the hill, there, stands Dalhousie. I'm one of the thousands who went to college there. For most of us, it was a time when our days seemed just a little longer, and life seemed to have no limits. Now we call ourselves alumni, and those long Dalhousie days have blurred a little. I guess it's only natural that the happiest recollections are the slowest to fade in the process of nostalgia. That's one reason why few of us could undertake a history of our small college by the sea. The facts would probably be pretty incompatible with the memories. Still, the farther back you go, the easier it gets to be objective. And I'd like to take you all the way back to where Dalhousie began. The first Dalhousie building was in the old part of town, near the harbor. In 1749, the first settlers laid out their streets around a drill square they called the Grand Parade. 71 years later, they finally got around to establishing a non-sectarian college for Nova Scotians. It was one man's idea. He was a military man, Scottish by birth, and after the War of 1812, as Lieutenant Governor of Nova Scotia, he planned a college modeled on the University of Edinburgh. There was money available from customs dues collected during the British occupation of Castine in Maine. And there was land available right here, at the north end of the Grand Parade, where the City Hall building now stands. The man with the idea was George Ramsay, 9th Earl of Dalhousie.
From this college, every blessing may flow over your country. In a few months hence, may it dispense those blessings to you whom I now address. May it continue to dispense them to the latest ages. Let no jealousy disturb its peace. Let no lukewarm indifference disturb its growth.
It was ironic that jealousy, lukewarm indifference, and religious and political wrangling did disturb its peace and check its growth for decades after George Ramsay laid the cornerstone of the first Dalhousie building and moved on to govern Canada. The original building that occupied this site at various times housed an infant school, mechanics institute, a confectionery, and even a brewery. Not quite what the Earl had in mind, and hardly the University of Edinburgh. But Lord Dalhousie's ideas weren't forgotten or thwarted by everybody. In 1838, a group of legislators succeeded at last in having the college opened under its first president, the Reverend Thomas McCulloch. Then McCulloch died, and so did the activity. It had lasted all of 5 years. For 20 years, the building was used as a post office, a dancing school, a storehouse for militia rifles, a collegiate, and then a high school operated out of the building, too. But they were Dalhousie in name alone. Then, in 1863, Dalhousie College was reactivated under her second president, the Reverend James Ross. This time, it stuck. Under Ross, 60 students enrolled, 6 professors taught them, a library was acquired, a college newspaper was begun. Dalhousie graduates left this little campus with their degrees and a reputation for learning. In a few years, there were enough of them to form the first Dalhousie Alumni Association. That's me, and over 40,000 others. And then, they had to get out of here in 1886 to make room for City Hall. The new site was uptown, away from the harbor and the racket of the waterfront trade. It was on a shady street surrounded by estates and farms. It was a good place to grow in peace. Dr. John Forrest was president by then. Dr. Forrest had a brother-in-law, a rich brother-in-law named George Monroe, who endowed the college with bursaries, scholarships, and teaching chairs that still bear his name. In fact, he gave so much to Dalhousie that his gifts were described as unparalleled in the history of British North America. Without him, Dalhousie might have gone back to sleep. Instead, it sprung into vigorous life under the roof of this big pile of Victorian brick that Dal students still use. It's called the Forest Building, after the third president, and there are those who remember when it was new, when it was Dalhousie.
It was a small college, and you knew pretty nearly everyone in college. It was just the Forest Building, and there wasn't any women's residence then. Then, in 1912, they had a house on South Park Street, and it was called Forest Hall. We had excellent teachers, but teachers in my day were natural enemies to a certain extent. And, of course, we all had to take the full 20 courses, and we had to carry on in our subjects. We all had to take a classical language for 3 years. I took 2. I took Greek, because we had the strictest teacher, who was Dr. Howard Murray, but he was a splendid teacher. Well, there were several other courses that we had to take in the freshman year. I think you had only 8 electives, but we had a very good time. Oh, we had a glee club. We sang all the old songs, you know, Roman and Voya, and Seeing Nellie Home, and I don't know what, and all kinds, and Hail to thee, Dalhousie, our college by the sea, and that's all I remember.
Still not the University of Edinburgh, perhaps, but a college that was known for a lot of the same Scottish virtues: thrift, industry, and for relief, a slightly raw-boned sense of fun. For instance, Dr. Forrest's dignity was imposing enough to have earned him the nickname Lord John, but that didn't keep a group of students from installing a large live cow in his office one night as a respite from the liberal arts. Dalhousians were citizens of no mean city, nor were bachelor's degrees by now their perimeter, because professional schools began to entrench the college as a true university. This began with the law school, which emerged as one of Canada's first and finest in 1883. By the turn of the century, the so-called Weldon tradition of the law faculty was recognized far beyond this little quad, particularly in other universities of the world.
What brought Weldon to Halifax and started the school was, of course, George Monroe's money. George Monroe gave what was then the magnificent sum of $2,000 a year to bring Weldon to Halifax as head of the school. Benjamin Russell, later known to students as Benny Russell, he and Weldon were the co-founders of the law school. From the beginning, the school was an instantaneous success. Quite soon after the law school started, the West began to open up. And to the West, from the Hungry Maritimes, went a number of law school graduates. In very short order, these had made not only their names, but the name of the Dalhousie Law School. And the Dalhousie Law School, almost from the beginning, drew the brightest minds of the Maritimes to it. If you ask why the law school stuck away at the extreme end of Canada, succeeded in making in the minds of old students right across the country the impact it did, the answer is perhaps because it was just like a little family, so small was it, that they loved it and felt that in some way more was expected of them than was expected of people who came from other lesser schools.
From the little Halifax Medical College, which stood in the shadow of the Forest Building Tower, came the now famous Dalhousie Medical School. But its genesis wasn't as early nor as easy as the law schools.
Dalhousie, was really a glorified high school. in effect. It was not only a glorified high school, but the only school that had any viability at all was the law school. But the medicine was at its nadir. It was terrible, of course, and up to that time, the school was really the old Halifax Medical College, and the teachers were just doctors around Halifax in practice. But we had no laboratories. The pathological building was just being put up. All through my early days here, if I wanted something for my department that, say, cost up to $50, it was simpler for me to go out and buy it out of my own pocket than wait till the Board of Governors passed on the $50. Today, Jesus, they throw $1,000 at you, and they're mad if you don't waste it. But in those days, Stan Mackenzie watched every 15-cent piece. So the Rockwell people said, well, all right, if you will put in the Department of Physiology and the Department of Anatomy on a full-time scale, we'll give you a subsidy to support that. And they said, your Department of Obstetrics is very, very poor. You ought to combine obstetrics and gynecology, and we'd give you some help with that. As a result of that, the college changed really from a high school, a glorified high school, to a university, sort of.
Rockefeller grants, recognition, and enrollment reaching a point where each successive freshman class was claiming a record as the largest yet. The old bundle of bricks couldn't hold all that for long, and it didn't. There was still room in the South End, lots of it, among the half-developed streets, the fenced-in farmsteads, and the pine woods that sloped away to the northwest arm. Dalhousie was stretching toward home.
As a small boy, I lived on Lemerton Street, next to the Studley campus. My early recollections are of the Murray family living at Studley. A few years later, Dalhousie bought the property, and I saw the cornerstone laid at the Science Building, the MacDonald Library, and I thought that the Duke would roll up his sleeves and spread the mortar. And I felt cheated when he just tapped the stone with a little silver trowel and said, "This stone is well and truly laid." My father, who kept a cow and a horse at Lemerton Street, used to rent the Studley campus for $25 a year for cow pasture. As a schoolboy, it used to be my job to take the cow and tether her at Studley, and at lunch hour, my father would come home and couldn't see the cow, and he'd want to know where she was. So I would say Dr. Mackenzie told me to hide the cow, and my father would say, "Put the cow back. I grew up in Pictou County with Stan Mackenzie. Don't pay any attention to him." Well, I entered Dalhousie in the fall of 1922. Dalhousie had a total enrollment at that time of about 800. The individual class was a very closely knit unit, and we had class parties all through the year.
There was a time during the expansion of Studley when Dalhousie never won a football game, but it was a time when most of the players were in other uniforms, on other fields.
We had the evening paper, and there was the Killed in Action list, and we read that. It was a sort of numbing. I remember Dr. Murray translating Horace in the class, and it was the line, "Dulce et decorum est pro patria mori." It is sweet and pleasant to die for one's country. And he said, well, that's true, but it is better to live for your country. We lost 2 or 3 boys during that week. It was really very sad. And yet, you know, we were young, and when you're young, these things are hurt. It is a great sorrow, but it passes.
After the war, there were lasting changes at Studley. Among the most evident, if not the most important, were bobbed hair and the emergence of Joe College. And a new breed of professor had come to the campus.
What happened to the Dal campus was an influx of new and in many ways different students, and of new and often in many ways different professors. Most of them, not all, ex-servicemen, and with a variety of training, much different from the solid straight-line routine which had trained their predecessors, of which the standard remaining representatives were Dr. McMakin and Dr. Howard Murray. It was a little college, like a hayfield with 3 stone barns surrounded by rough stone fences. Rustic, down to earth, real, homespun, handmade, no nonsense. And to me, at any rate, there was the same quality in the students. They were dependable, they were thorough. No frills, and if they were given a job of work to do, they didn't inquire as to how to evade it or why it was given. It was there and they got on with it. Basically, the Nova Scotian, or the maritime ethos, as it's called, something in the character and quality of the area from which in those days, and even today, the great majority of the students were drawn. It is as much the character and quality of Nova Scotia as the character and quality of Dalhousie that has kept me here, at any rate, through so many years, and I know it's true of many other people.
New walls of rough-cut stone were rising as Dalhousie added more buildings. Among them was Sheriff Hall, a beautifully appointed women's residence. Among the appointments were a few cozy little alcoves along the front portico, where a goodnight kiss or a furtive fumble might be accomplished in relative privacy. And one building was spectacularly deleted. Dal's first gymnasium, a flimsy affair at best, went out in a blaze of glory. Nobody really believed it was an accident. Another gym was built, and by the time it was finished, the university had assumed the character of class and campus it would hold for the next 40 years.
I came to Dalhousie in 1923, and I've had pretty strong connections ever since. I've seen firsthand 4 presidents. Stan Mackenzie, that austere but kindly man of such great integrity. Carlton Stanley, an eminent scholar. Alec Carr, who was a prominent churchman. And now the very original Henry Hicks, very much a man of the times. From the last days of Mackenzie to the first of Hicks, Dalhousie actually changed very little, but through these years it did acquire character at about the same steady rate, perhaps, that the walls acquired their much-envied coats of ivy. There were many disciplines and professional schools that became firmly established during this time: dentistry, commerce, engineering, nursing, education. Dal's Institute of Public Affairs was a new direction. And now we have theater, music, health services, international affairs, physical education, library science, oceanography, and the list goes on. An example of the type of product that Dalhousie has given the country over the years lies in the inner cabinet war committee during the World War II, which was certainly the most important single group in government at that time. Roughly half the members were Dalhousians. Well, as in the case of World War I, the student body was depleted from 1939 to 1945, and swelled again after the war by an influx of veterans, hundreds of them. And this brought a a great need for temporary housing and, of course, more staff. I don't think things at Dal were ever the same after World War II, but the real change perhaps didn't come until the 60s. Now, that's when we saw the great expansion that changed the little college into something closer to a so-called multiversity. But even with that, I think there's still something indestructible about Dalhousie that was molded and cast during those 3 or 4 decades beginning in the mid-20s.
By this time, there were active chapters of the Dalhousie Alumni Association in the major cities of North America. It's the usual sort of thing, I suppose. We number in the thousands, meet in the dozens, and record our milestones in our news magazine. And for a long time now, in the usual tradition, we've been coming back for reunions, pilgrimages that mean lobster and nostalgia, and tend to get a little maudlin in the shank of the evening. It's a time when we rediscover that we may differ in 40,000 ways, but that most of us react to the same sentimental pastiche. The songs, the stories, and the scenes that center on Studley campus. No two of us may see quite the same pieces, but we do share the same mosaic. If it's not quite the stuff of history, it may be because there's too much affection in it, and an intimacy of shared experience that only Dalhousians can know.
Yes, we come from Dalhousie, our alma mater, our mother dear, and proudly now we sing her praises, that all may know that the sons are near. Oh, dear we Dalhousie, our college by the sea, with heart and voice we praise thee, wherever we may be.
Dalhousie's not small anymore. The old gathering spots, Roy Atwood's bookstore, and Joe's on Spring Garden Road are gone. So are the campus characters like Red Payne, Butsy O'Brien, and Jimmy Sykes. The staff is bigger now than the whole student body was not so long ago. But there's still something about Studley that the boom of expansion couldn't bury, and those of us who wander back find the feeling still strong. It's part English ivy and part saltwater fog. If you've ever lived in Halifax, you know it's only in sentimental songs where smiles the sea neath a sky ever blue. But there's something worth coming back for, if only in the imagination. Something that started to form a century ago when the Dalhousie Alumni Association officially formed our family compact. And it's in that feeling of family, no matter how big that family may become. There stands Dalhousie, the college by the sea.